I'm very, very privileged now to introduce this panel. So we've got the panel on new media and new ways of looking for content, social media. Obviously the digital world is taking over now. The way we market to our customers has changed. So we've got a panel of experts here who are going to share with you some of their experiences in that PR, marketing, social world. I'm going to introduce Chris Henry, who's going to moderate this session for us. Chris is the Managing Director of boutique entertainment PR agency 818 and the social partnership agency People of Influence. Launched in 2014, 818 has been the PR force behind some of New Zealand's most successful entertainment projects, including Kiwi films, The Breaker Uppers, What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, and more recently, Savage and Cousins. 818 also ran the PR for Matilda, Aladdin the Musical, and the upcoming international tour of The Lion King, as well as Rhythm and Vines. Over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Mark, and kia ora, everyone. Thanks for having us. I hope that this discussion that we can have today and the questions that follow are really helpful to your processes going forward. We understand that many of you wear many hats, so we're hoping that some of the ideas here can help dispel the myths of what we do and how hard it is to allow you guys to have some really proactive stuff that we can do. So let me do some introductions to start. So I'll start off here with Luke. So Luke is, during the day, he works his own chartered accounting practice that helps business owners achieve their goals, and is heavily involved in the struggling horse racing industry, where he won a national award for contribution to media in the industry. He manages a community of 20,000 young people who enjoy the sport, and in 2021, they created history by running an interactive betting syndicate with $178,000 in the pool, which is no mean feat, so congratulations on that. Over 1,250 people took place in that from all around New Zealand using social media, and 850 people attended the live event that you built from scratch in the first 4 years, so that's awesome. Thank you very much for being part of this.
No worries.
We have Alice. Since 2017, Alice has been heading up the brands and comms for Tamaki Makoto's home of independent performing arts, the Q Theatre. After spearheading a business-saving fundraiser for Q in 2020, she became even more passionate about maintaining the spaces for diverse voices and stories in the city to be uplifted and celebrated on our stages. And it's a beautiful venue, and we're really glad to have you here. Thank you so much, Alice. Jess. Now, Jess has been on the leading edge of social media for over a decade now. You wouldn't be able to tell.
Thank you.
With roles leading sponsorship, music and marketing in some of New Zealand's largest organisations. Now she runs a boutique marketing agency called Moloney Moloney, and alongside her team, helps businesses and brands, large and small, harness the power of social media to achieve their business outcomes. So, can I have a round of applause for my fellow panellists? So, as Mark mentioned, we are here to kind of talk about new media and publicity and that sort of stuff, and how it can be kind of implemented to the work that you guys are doing from a venue's perspective. And I think that kind of the key thing that we'll probably talk about today will be really around social media and the benefits of that and how to execute it. So, I suppose the first thing to kind of to kick us off is really kind of looking at social media as a whole and realising it's not just for the kids. It is something that is used by all ages and all demographics. So I suppose I wanted to throw to the panel first about why an active social presence is so important, and I feel like, Jess, you're probably best placed to kind of kick this off.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, last year was a really perfect example of if you weren't online, you were invisible. And social media is one of those places where you get to have daily conversations with your customers and your target audiences and be able to kind of influence them in a long-term decision. I like to think about it as building a relationship, and I quite often with my clients talk about it as flirting. And so obviously you'll all be sitting here with sort of specific goals that you want to achieve for your business. It might be ticket sales, it might be, renting out the space for events, and so actually kind of targeting that on a longer term journey and kind of thinking about that as a narrative is incredibly important for businesses. And if you're not there, like I looked up a business the other day and they weren't on Instagram, and I immediately felt suspicious. And so I think there is this kind of changing consumer behaviour now where even if you're not active in those channels, people still expect to find you and be able to contact you there. It's just changing customer expectations.
Absolutely. I think what you were saying about being invisible last year is totally right. And Alice, this must have been something that was really key for you guys when you were forced to close the doors for a while. Do you want to talk about that process or that kind of experience using social?
Yeah, I mean, very triggering, but
Apologies.
for everyone in the room. Yes, obviously we had to close in March, and our income is for people gathering together and people buying tickets, so our income stopped overnight, and it was pretty touch and go, as I'm sure it was for a lot of people, and we did close the doors, but they were nearly permanently closed, and we made sort of a last-ditch attempt to rally our supporters, and the way that we did that was entirely through digital. And one of the main reasons is because that was essentially free, and we were able to lean on our supporters and influencers, probably not in the traditional sense, but people who had performed at Q and organisations that relied on the business, like festivals and things like that, to do video testimonials. And so the staff that we did keep, we were able to edit content, edit videos, and we just went out, and I was on the phone and on Zoom with everyone and anyone who'd ever had anything to do with Q, and we just had an outpouring of support of digital content, which then turned into us creating imagery videos and then email content that just went out to our databases, and we raised over $160,000, which is the reason that we're still open. So that platform was, our saving grace, and the fact that we were able to do it for free, other than our staff that we'd managed to keep on, which were all on wage subsidy anyway, we were able to survive. So we weren't doing big billboards or poster campaigns or anything. It was all online.
Very cool. And Luke, the way that you kind of have used social media has really harnessed a wider community from around the country to a specific idea. Do you want to talk a bit about how that works and kind of the success you guys have had?
Yeah, I think so. On the racing side of things, we just wanted somewhere where people could come and be able to talk about a sport that they were interested in. And now I think you're starting to see a lot of businesses talk about community, and that being a really important driver of a business. And I think social media basically gives us a way to be able to do that across these different platforms. And going back to what Jess said, like if you're invisible, then potentially to people, then you may not exist. And if your competitors are visible, then they've got an unfair advantage on you. And even just people want to consume the information where they want to consume it. Years ago, we didn't have the choice, but I'd imagine just about everyone in here has a cell phone. And so that's happened so quickly, but we kind of forget that. And so then we determine how we use that and when and how we want to look at that. And unfortunately, that means that it's then our responsibility to sort of watch what consumers are doing and make sure that we serve them so that we stay relevant to them. And in my accounting industry, for instance, we've built up a good amount of clients through social media, and we were signing the docs to get us started, and the lawyer said, "Who do you think is going to watch 2 accountants on Instagram?" And 2 years later, I'm like, well, watch. And she started commenting. So, if we can do it in accounting, there's no reason that everybody can't do something with social media or digital content.
Yeah, awesome. This is a really good segue in terms of kind of the building that community and the fact that everyone is using different broadcast methods, whether it's reading the newspaper or being on social media. I'm quite keen to talk a little bit about how we would use platforms based off the audiences we're trying to go after. Alice, do you want to talk a bit about the different platforms that you use and whether that sort of changes between projects that you're working on or shows that are coming in?
Yeah, so we have an incredibly diverse audience based on the stuff that we have on. So we have the Comedy Festival, the Auckland Arts Festival, which is mainly theatre. We have a dance festival. We have a film festival. We have a lot of independent works. We've had some film premieres and all that kind of thing. So our audience across the board there isn't one Q audience. And the way that we communicate with those different audiences are completely different. So at the start of the year, we always have Auckland Pride and Auckland Fringe Festival, and that is mostly emerging talent, specifically in Fringe, and a lot of younger audiences coming along, so that is almost exclusively digital. But then there's like a solid Auckland Theatre Company season of theatre, which is 3 weeks long, which there's a certain chunk of that audience that won't even acknowledge its existence or buy a ticket if there's not something in the New Zealand Herald for it. So there's, you really have to know who the audience is for your specific project, but that's not to say that you can't then use that to get a wider audience. So the core audience might be only in the New Zealand Herald, but you might be able to use digital ads on the New Zealand Herald, and then you might have potentially Facebook content to get sort of fringes of that, but there's no point in even bothering spending your time and money on that for audiences that you know are engaging and only on Instagram. And I think, knowing who your audience is and what platforms they're interacting on, but being able to use content where you can that kind of speaks across multiple ways, but cutting it in a different way, not using the same content, to not draw yourself too thin across everything as well.
Yeah. Luke, just come to you quickly. What sort of platforms are you using for your social media, and where are you seeing the most success?
Well, it varies across the different things that I'm doing. I've been a little bit lazy. I've even found myself almost getting fatigued by it, where I haven't dive too deep into TikTok, which Jess will probably tell me off about because it's got such an organic reach, unfair advantage at the moment. But I saw it blowing up and was like, oh, do I have to learn another platform? And I was like, I don't feel like I'm going to be very good at this one, and sort of turned my back on it a little bit, but then delegated it in some regards. But I think LinkedIn is a very, very powerful tool that we all have at our fingertips these days as well, that's kind of underutilised. And I think a part of that is that we were just talking about this before we got started, but if you self-promote yourself in New Zealand, who do you think you are? But I don't know if you know, but unless you promote your event, your venue, you can't get people through the door. So we've got to bin that mentality. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to produce content. And I think, LinkedIn a great way to be able to show other people that are genuinely on a social media platform to be educated rather than be entertained. So, if you are going to spend some time of a platform where you think like, okay, I could probably dabble in that, then that would be a good one to explore. But Facebook's still working well, Instagram's going nuts still, so is TikTok, and it's constantly changing. So it can get very hard to keep up with what you're supposed to be doing, and you can spread yourself too thin. But don't neglect LinkedIn would be my point for you there.
Nice. And Jess, I'm coming to you last in this regard because I know that you've got a beautiful, your finger on the pulse in terms of what the community are using and what's happening in the future. I mean, where do you think that people should be using, what platforms do you think people should be using now, and like we said, what should we not be ignoring in the future?
Absolutely. I've kind of got a couple of answers to this question. I think the number one thing I always think about with social is that the clue is in the word, it's social. And so the easiest way I like to kind of explain this to customers is I like to think about walking into a building like this and there being 5 rooms. And one's a Facebook room, one's a TikTok room, one's an Instagram room, and in each of these rooms, there's kind of different activity happening. So if we think about Instagram right now and today, we know that people are sharing their everyday life on their stories. We know that it's a very aesthetic channel. We know that people are stopping on things like beautiful photos. Photo content on Instagram often outperforms video content. And then you walk into the Facebook room and everyone there is a little bit more lurky. So they're not they're sort of not talking as much, but they're sort of, everyone's watching each other, everyone's being very observant, so it's quite informative. You learn a lot through kind of scrolling through your news feed now. Think about like the memes, the articles, the things you see from your friends that you might not even engage with. You still know it's happening, so you sort of absorb it like that. And then you walk into the TikTok room and it's crazy in there. TikTok is our biggest growing channel in New Zealand. We've now got over 1 million people on that channel. It is very much, they've just released an advertising product, but it is very much sort of being fueled by the algorithm to kind of encourage more users onto the platform. So now is a really good time to be on that channel because you can kind of tap into that. I think the other thing about TikTok that's really surprised me is that in the last 18 months, it's now the #1 source of financial advice for people under the age of 25, for example, because you've got people sharing real life examples, sharing their investment stories. I've got a real estate agent client who's got 500,000 views on some of her TikToks with no spend behind it, and it's her tootling around a house and doing DIY and showing how good she is at renovation. So there's really interesting business behaviour happening on that channel, but you've got to think about how you show up. So if you are showing up in that lurky kind of way, the Facebook way, and you turn up in the TikTok room, you're going to be the weirdo at the party. Whereas if you turn up in the Instagram room and you don't look great, you're going to be the person that didn't dress up for the occasion. So my kind of number one rule is I like to see brands on every single channel. And the reason why is what we sort of spoke about earlier. That's a trust and credibility thing. If I can't find you, I feel a little bit suspicious. And there is a lot of your users that will feel like that as well. They feel inconvenienced, or they don't come to you with their complaint or their question because they can't be bothered leaving TikTok to go to Instagram. A lot of it is laziness. So I like to see businesses on every single channel. It doesn't mean you need to be active necessarily on every single channel. You might find you're getting a bit of better business outcome from LinkedIn, and then shift your behaviour as the platform shifts. So if we were sitting here having this conversation 5 years ago, I would have told you something completely different about Facebook. You know, like we're at the mercy of consumer behaviour here. Like there was a time where Snapchat, if you weren't on Snapchat as an entertainment brand, you'd be, you know, like you were missing out. And then suddenly Instagram updated their video function and everyone went over there and started doing stories. And that was like an overnight thing that happened within a week. So move with the behaviour and think about it in that kind of context of a real life scenario that makes sense for you and your business.
Yeah. I was just going to say as well, Facebook, they built community through Facebook groups, and that's how, with our racing stuff, we got lucky because it was before Facebook Messenger, and we wanted a way, 5 of us, to be able to talk about what we were betting on a Saturday, and that grew to 20,000 people in a Facebook group because they were getting preferential algorithm treatment effectively. But people have built communities in just about every region of New Zealand, so don't feel like you have to go and do the building of the community. You could, as a venue, for instance, go in and say, hey, just a heads up, you know, this is the local community. We thought you might be interested that we've got this on this week if there's any questions. So don't neglect what other people have built, thinking that you've got to be the builder of the audience.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And Jess, I love your analogy about the rooms. That's a fantastic way of describing it, and I totally agree with you. And on the financial advice thing, I've definitely got caught in a few Bitcoin TikTok holes, and whoa, buy low, sell high, that's the rules. So I suppose the kind of key thing when it comes to social media, I'm sure we'd all agree, is that content is king, to use that sort of buzzword. I suppose I'm quite keen to hear from you guys about what you think makes good content. Should we start this way and work our way around?
Yeah, it's always the stuff that you put the least amount of time into and think, I don't know if I should post this, and then you're like, oh, how's that worked? But authenticity, like we all love that, and things with people in it is really, really good. And if you have got someone in your team that's a good storyteller, you've got a massive unfair advantage, because we grow up our whole lives reading and learning and listening to stories, and then when it's our turn to try and create them, we're like, I don't know how to do that. But it's very easy to take a photo of something and just weave a story into it. And like my business partner in my accounting business, he's just like, mate, I don't know how you've turned that into a story, and I can't believe people have commented on that. Like, he just can't see what I can see. So sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. So I think, like, if you know that this isn't for you and it's uncomfortable, then don't try and be that person to create it, because you can almost sense it on the other end. And you know, I think something that's done really well recently would be the police. They seem to have just built this brand on social media where they've reconnected with the entire population, and everyone like hasn't thought about it and gone, they shouldn't be doing this, they could use these police resources for something else. Like, none of those things have happened. Everyone's just gone like, oh, cool. Like, the police have just recovered 700 grand. Like, look at that Maserati. And they're just storytelling. And so, you know, the news from 6 to 7 is basically our framework of, okay, what are they doing? And then why can't we do it? Because now we've got all the same tools as them. So try and stick to people, storytelling, and ask for some form of engagement too. Like, often people will just go, blah, here's our story. Well, like you said, like, it's social. How do you want people to then socialise back with you? And people love to be able to engage with something, and then they love it even more if they get a response, and people actually engaging back with them. And that's why people flood onto social media to be like, Vodafone, you suck, my internet's not working. And then all of a sudden it's just like, I get my chance to, you know, put their comment on as well. And if Vodafone start replying, then that can turn into other forms of content. So yeah, stick to the basics.
Yeah, perfect. I like to think about content as a bit of a mix. I like to think about what you need in terms of and it kind of changes from industry, but I like to kind of think about 5 categories of content. Product very much being one of them. What are you actually trying to sell here? But also thinking, really touching on that people thing. This is a really great way of you kind of showing your people to an external audience. I like to think about things like how to drive engagement. The police is a fantastic example, Luke. It may feel flippant if you think about what the police stand for, but every time they share one of those dog photos, they get hundreds and thousands of likes and comments and engagement. And every time I see that, there's a part of my brain at the back of it that goes, oh, that's gold. Because every time you engage someone, you can retarget them for the rest of your life. And so when you actually are creating content like that, it might not be, selling a product, but what it's actually doing is getting people in the door to your party, getting people in the door so that you've got a chance to engage with them further down the track and potentially with a bit more pointy messaging in terms of what it is you want them to do. I always like to learn from what people are responding to, be experimental about it, don't get too caught up in trying to make the content perfect. There's a lot of stuff that goes viral on social media, but it's often quite engineered. There's a lot of background stuff that happens in order to make those videos famous. But in terms of the kind of longevity of social, you're probably looking at 48 hours roughly in terms of how long that's kind of out there and active. So you can be experimental, and if it doesn't work, go back and look at it. I've learned more from posts that haven't performed as well as well-performing posts. I've learned more from that about the customer behaviour and how to kind of gear myself around that business and that particular customer segment by learning through what hasn't resonated as much as what has resonated. So I think just continually kind of going back there, looking at the data, trying to understand why people have commented, asking a question that's got a point as well, I think is a really good, you can kind of go out there and be like, which one would you choose? That might be a way of you getting kind of insights into what concert might be more popular or what's resonating better in a certain geographical area. So I think it's really very much a push-pull thing with content, and also target everything. You should be targeting everything on social.
I've got a few things. I think making sure that you just start and give it a go, because I think exactly what you said, if there's a 48-hour lifespan of something that doesn't do well, I think there's a tendency, particularly I know in arts organisations, when there's not a huge amount of resource and someone's doing it as the side hustle of their job, which is sort of another part and it should be a full-time job, but that you hesitate to do something or don't post anything, and then there's a lack of engagement and all that kind of thing. I think actually just giving it a go and then learning from what does or doesn't perform is a really key thing. Another thing is making sure that your content is specific to your audience if you were doing that in different ways. I always think of an example that we had when we were promoting a show, and we were doing digital ads, and we have our own ticketing software, so we have our own data, audience data, and we learnt so much from having 5 or 6 ads that were quite different. Imagery of the lead performer, an RNZ interview with the writer, and those sorts of things, and having different audiences, so people who really knew and engaged with us based on our newsletter database, and people who were kind of secondary to that or lookalike audiences from that, and not really thinking when putting that up, but then all of a sudden realising in the post-analysis of it that actually this reasonably unknown young writer who was interviewed on RNZ got huge amounts of traction from our database audience, but very little from the wider catchment, and then the very well-known performer imagery, and potentially, I can't remember, there was other stuff with her and that in a video and that sort of thing that really drive from that audience. So in some ways you might think this ad didn't perform as well on that audience, that's a shame, but actually it went to a smaller group and it was very targeted, they knew who it was and they wanted to buy a ticket. So giving it a go and putting stuff out there and then learning from it is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, they're all really good points. I suppose it's a good point now to kind of do a little bit of a show of hands. In the room today, who is either directly responsible or partly responsible as part of their job for the social media of their organisation? Nice. It's a good Good few numbers. And I suppose of those of you that have got your hands up, how many of you also have other jobs that you do? Awesome. So that's something that's really interesting about what these guys are saying. You know, it's quite a luxury that someone would have a dedicated social media manager to work on these things. But there's also amazing tools and things out there that can make life a lot easier. I mean, we're going to kind of get a bit off piece, but you know, between scheduling posts and using software to create design, I think that there are lots of great options there that we're going to kind of cover through this. One of the things that I think everyone struggles with, and you guys have mentioned, it's like, oh my God, what do I post? So I was quite keen to kind of pick your guys' brains about, in your organisations, where are you getting content from, and where else can you pull that sort of stuff from to go? Alice, do you want to kind of kick us off?
Well, we have content in the building, which is quite helpful, but as a venue, we don't necessarily own that content. So we're not making the shows and putting it on, so that kind of makes things a bit more complicated. But when you look at it from remembering the word social and social media and storytelling, is that although you don't necessarily want to just be sharing a poster image, that you potentially have people in the building rehearsing, or you have things that people don't often get to see, like behind the scenes, which is quite easy and low cost to go and kind of interact with. Stuff that a lot of people in this room probably take for granted as being really interesting to people outside of the industry, like this is actually what it looks like when you build a set, or like we're a completely black box theatre, so the theatre changes every single time there's a new show, and this is us opening up the floor and putting seats in and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of content that you probably have that you're not thinking of that is quite easy, and you've got it in and around your building. And if you can frame it, I think that's spot on, the storytelling thing. Like if you can, particularly if you have people in your team that think that way, and you kind of keep talking about those things, that there's easily a story to tell about stuff that you're already doing that actually is really interesting to other people that don't get to see it every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it comes down to understanding, so if you've got a business objective that you're trying to achieve, I think it's about kind of planning content that's going to help you influence that decision with your customer. So if you stand for exceptional health and safety, for example, I think it's about understanding how that story, again, storytelling, turns up regularly for customers, because people, if you think about your social media behaviour, we often overplay the importance of ourselves in our customers' lives. You know, what you're actually dealing with is a mum who's just got back from dropping the kids off at school, and she's a bit stressed, but she's kind of having a morning coffee and scrolling through really quickly. So we're dealing with people in their everyday lives. It's like walking into their houses, walking into their workplaces, turning up on their desktop computers. So you're very much you need to influence something over time. And so when it comes to what should you post, I just like to think about everything as being strategic. So for some of our brands, for example, a lot of those fun posts is because they want to be relatable. They want to be human. They want to turn up with what we like to call social currency, the idea of like seeing the stage open. That's something that you can give your customers or your audience that they never get a chance to see before. And you're right, there's so much hidden stories like that within business. I would just kind of like to pick up on a point that you made a little bit earlier as well, around making sure that when you are posting, you're not posting the same asset to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, because you've got different channels and different moods in each of those platforms. But turning up consistently with that same message, talk about the stage opening, that's potentially a chance on LinkedIn to hero your partners and your suppliers, and then that way you're reaching their networks online. And then on Facebook, that's probably just a cute little looped video that's just interesting and entertaining and is doing an engagement job for your audience. So kind of think about when you're posting how you show up on each of those channels, and just get creative with it. So think about those trends, what are people watching? How-to videos are really popular on YouTube, for example. So what how-to could your brand be offering people in that channel? And so sort of kind of aligning yourself with those trends, and just keep an eye on it and match what New Zealanders are doing.
Nick, I was also keen to hear your thoughts on this, but also to have a bit of an understanding of like how you could use characters as part of this process. Because I'm guessing through that stuff that you do via your Instagram channel, you've essentially kind of made yourselves characters as part of the process. Is that fair?
Yeah, a little bit. Like Phil and I, obviously, for my accounting business, we're got to have a pretty professional persona and whatnot. And then we make some videos, and I said to the videographer, I said, mate, can you just clip out those bloopers for us as a bit of a gag for us? And then I thought, should we just be cheeky and run this on Instagram and see how it goes? And it was just probably the best thing that we did, and just F-bombs and everything. And I'm like, wow, we've just broken the whole stigma of our industry with this one video. And people, like, they watch you and consume you, so then they kind of build up their own image of you as a character or whatnot. And that can be hard if you're not, inclined to get in front of the camera and do those things. But it's definitely a good way to try and have a character in a story, because that's how stories work, right? So if you've consistently got like someone, a lot of the horse racing studs and stuff that I work with, obviously they use the horses, and then they'll use their dogs as well. Like, hey, this is employee such and such, and they turn the dog into a character, and people love that stuff, much like the police. So I think it's possible for all of us. And even, I remember there's a venue in the Hawke's Bay somewhere where apparently it's haunted, and there's a ghost who sometimes puts one of the seats down or something. And I can like remember the story from my time there. And so like naming something like that, or retelling the story of, who is that ghost or who is that character and things. And there's always ways that you can do that. And just on some like boringer stuff, I think, frequently asked questions, for instance, like you were saying, like you're trying to solve someone's problem. So what we do with our accounting business is basically we take all of our clients' queries over 7 days, and then the next week we turn it into 2 podcasts, and we talk for half an hour about, hey, this is what this business is going through, and then hundreds of businesses can come to that and learn from it. And by the time they get to us, we're not having to sell to them, because they're like, right, you've given me so much value, you've proven that you know the answers to these things, like how do I sign up? And it's just changed our conversion rate like massively. So sticking to those basics of what questions can you answer for people, and what problem are you actually solving for people, because most people are on a platform for either escapism, entertainment, or education. And I don't know if you try to run an accounting business, but it's bloody tough to be entertaining. So you've got to think about education for an avenue like that.
Yeah, very cool. One of the things that I was also kind of keen to talk about, and I know from experience that I've had, often we talk about what we're going to post and how we're going to get it. I also wouldn't be scared of trying to look back at previous venues that have had projects that have come through your way, and trying to build your wider social network in terms of that content creation. There is a lot of content that's being created at venues all around the world, and if you've got an act coming in that someone else has done a really great campaign for, there's no reason why you can't use that content, with permission of course, but worthwhile kind of touching base with those guys. We're going to get to some questions soon, so I'm not sure what is the process a hand up, or is it a... Oh, perfect, great. But before we go into that, I was keen to talk about the I word, which is influencers. I've got a vested interest. I run a social talent agency called People of Influence, and we work with influential Kiwis on their social media accounts. And the influencer space is a super interesting part of the world. It has lots of different people as part of it. But the general idea of influencers is so broad around everything that we do. And I think that one of the things that we were really kind of keen to talk about was redefining the idea of influencers to you in terms of influential people and people that are part of your space and your venue and your community that could become really influential to you. Alice, you would have this quite a lot in your space. Do you want to talk about people of influence that are part of your business and how that affects, or how that positively affects the sales, I suppose, or the brand perception of Q?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different, as I said, like the audiences for different shows and performances are all quite different, but there's a few key people that, I'm going to forget his name. Is Kate here? Yes. Ian Morton. Ian Morton is a avid theatre goer that I think has gone to every single show at Q, and I'm pretty sure, and we had a box office open to the public pre-COVID, and we would sell shows to the basement as well, and people could buy their subscriptions for Auckland Theatre Company, Silo Theatre Company, and all of the box office staff knew him, all of the cafe staff knew him. He would come in multiple times a week and would know everything, would always buy a program, would talk to people in the cafe about the shows that he'd seen. So there are people like that who are relatively unknown, who just could potentially absolutely love your product. And I was in the business for probably nearly 12 months before I even met him, because we didn't cross paths because I was in the office. That someone like that is an incredible asset. So there are people who are very much ordinary people who just potentially love to do whatever your venue will offer. But there's also, within the community of artists and performers, then there's artists and performers that love going to other people's stuff. So really making sure that those sorts of, there's certainly, like during Comedy Festival, comedians in particular in New Zealand are huge on Twitter. And so making sure that you are then, when something like that is happening, you're making sure you're really monitoring that platform that those people are on, and then they're going to other comedians, and potentially it's an international comedian talking about a New Zealand comedian or someone who's a Billy T nominee, and making sure that you're sort of retweeting that content. But then there's also, from the charitable side, there's also philanthropists and donors who are incredibly influential and live in these circles that we don't necessarily have access to all of them, but then a lot came out during our campaign last year, and we would get forwarded emails of a person that probably had donated before but we'd been hugely engaged with, that all of a sudden we had an email from someone and we could see through the chain that someone had just been like, I'm giving 10 grand to Q. It's a really great theatre, I think you should too. And 5 more people gave us 10 grand who we'd never met, and we were sort of, what shows have they been to? Oh, they went to one show in 2016. So making sure that we're interacting with them heavily now, but making sure that you don't sort of discount regular people, I guess. And then people who perform in your spaces, potentially, I think a lot of, because of the size of our venue, we're not, the people that perform aren't necessarily selling out Spark Arena, but they have come up through a lot of the smaller venues, and therefore their influence on the rest of the artistic community is quite strong, particularly like comedians and stuff. And last night we had a opening night for a show that came back that was on during Pride Festival, Let's Get Loco, and there was Electroshock, who's just been eliminated from RuPaul's Drag Race, was there, and then she put it on her Instagram story, and then that's all of a sudden a thing that just by sharing, like completely free, sharing her story, you're suddenly getting out to a wider network, and then people and Q Theatre's tagged. So it's also kind of knowing, if you can, being present with your handles and that sort of thing, and making sure that people are tagging you so you can sort of share their content. I think there's a lot of, something I meant to mention earlier was that I think specifically in the arts, but I'm sure across venues, is there's a lot of user-created content that you can pull on. People have incredible phones in their cameras in their pockets at any given time that are taking incredible photos of 660 and right at the perfect time when the fireworks are going off, and like that is incredible content for you to just be sharing on the night and those sorts of things. So really using the community as your influencers more than celebrities, and necessarily need to paying them for every opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Jess, do you want to talk a bit about your kind of feelings on that, and what sort of practical examples might be in the venue communities in terms of influential people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think influence, I completely agree with you. I think number one, your customers and your clients are your influencers. Those are the first people you should be thinking about and rewarding them with either experiences or with content in terms of the content that they share with you. I think there's some venue, I like to think about what will make a great picture story and make my job easier. So if you walk into a venue, for example, and you're in a blank space, people will talk and mingle. If there is a brightly coloured wall that looks like an Instagram background, people will queue up for that. Like there are places now in like around the world where people queue up for more than 2 hours to get a photo in front of like an iconic wall. There were more people who visited the Flamingo Wall in Paris 2 years ago than people that visited the Eiffel Tower, apparently, in terms of like actually going and having that experience. So people are looking constantly for that moment. You know, Kate and myself, we realised when we got here we were wearing pink, and then we got out of the Civic car park and they had a pink wall, and when we were those girls and took those photos in the car park. But you know, like those moments, a pink wall. Yeah, I did. I hashtagged it. I told Sally when I walked in, I was like, hashtag it. She was thrilled. So I think it's about what are those moments that you can offer your customers that make them take content and do that job for you. I've got a couple of examples of influence that are probably a little bit outside the box. We once did a CapEx. We had a client who was on a CapEx run. They wanted to attract more investors. We figured out they were going into these businesses, so we created, please don't think I'm creepy, we created a series of articles that basically told the business story, and we targeted it at people in that building. Like you can get that targeted with stuff. We targeted at people with the same type of job descriptions, so that when they walked in, instead of it being like an investor kind of meeting where there's that sort of strange feeling across the table and people are trying to work out who this person is, they were walking into a room with the CEO of some of New Zealand's biggest listed companies who went, oh, I've seen this all over my news. I've seen this. I've read that article. No, I know exactly who you are. I know what you stand for. So sometimes influence is the businesses that you're going to. And I think probably my favourite example that's probably very relevant to a few people in this room was about 7 or 8 years ago. I was working at Spark New Zealand for a long time, and the R&V partnership fell underneath my remit. And we wanted to make a stand for music in terms of, it was very early on in our days and we just launched Spotify here. And so we wanted to make a stand for music, and so we decided the biggest people that could kind of influence the mindset of New Zealanders around music was musicians. But obviously working with budgets and all the parameters and not being able to use certain types of content, I know you guys know all this stuff, we had to think a little bit outside the box. And it was also, I think it was a year after emojis sort of became very popular here in New Zealand. And so what we did was we went and made personalised emojis for every single artist that played at R&V, and then we went and set them up. So they've got like cardboard printouts, and we went and set them up in dressing rooms. We stuck them in the lobby. We stuck them around the house that all the artists were staying at. And you know, we had Bastille go out and buy a bigger suitcase so that they could fly them home without folding them up, and they shared that on their Instagram story. Had Danny Brown walking around holding the hand of his emoji, telling me about how he never got a doll growing up and this was a dream come true. You know, there was like all, and like, so for something that probably cost less than $1,000, getting all these emojis designed and then printed out on this core flute, we got so much reach through their audiences that we were also then able to share our gifting on our channels as well, because we were able to talk about the emojis. We were able to kind of create that influence through just thinking a little bit outside the box. And so I think, you know, the influencer world has changed hugely. I'm still traditional influencers and the kind of people that might pop into your head, the Lululemon wearing, you know, me on the weekend. But, you know, like those kind of people, they still very much exist. And I like to think about those people as a media channel, because you can kind of pump out a whole bunch of stuff and you're getting a whole bunch of reach and frequency across a bunch of people. Might not necessarily be the most strategic thing, but you're still getting reach and frequency. So sometimes we kind of like to mix it up a bit and then think about how people of influence can sit alongside that, and then media and customers. And so we like to kind of think about it as a bit of an ecosystem.
Very cool.
It's very grunty. I haven't got anything cool like that. But one thing we do with our merchandise for our racing group is that we started a thing called Spotted. So it was basically if you spot someone wearing that, then like either they send a photo of themselves or someone will send it in a photo of, they'll spot someone like nationwide and go like, oh, I'm in Christchurch, I've just spotted this person. And they might go up and have a yarn. So it just builds that community piece even more. But it then gives us content that we can use back on our socials, which effectively then the old person's like, oh, I better go and buy a piece of merchandise as well. And I think when you're watching content, like look at what other people are doing to be an influencer. And so instead of looking at the Lululemon influencers perhaps, the gangs. Like it shits me going on social media and seeing it just on these bloody Harleys, and I'm going like, I'm working hard and I don't have a Harley and I don't even want one, but like people are watching that, getting influenced and thinking, oh, that's a great life pathway. So if they can do it, there's no excuse for us, and we should be, I'm not saying do what they're doing, I'm saying we've got to fight back, you know?
Accountants on Harleys.
But you know, we've got to be thinking, look, if they're using it and they're using it for bad, you know, we're out here trying to do things for good and then thinking it's too hard. You know, we've got to change our mindset a little bit and go, righto, actually, we're doing good things in the community and people need to hear about it, and I'm not ashamed of that.
They're really good examples, and I think that I hope that they kind of roll into some of the ideas that you've got. I think that the last point that we were keen to cover before we throw to some questions is just to try and get a little bit practical. So you're leaving this event with something that you can do. So kind of starting here and working our way down, what is the key thing that you could do, or these guys could do, to set them up for social success that they could do today?
Okay, so 2 quick tips. Never forget your old content. Everybody thinks, oh, we've posted that. Or do you think everyone was looking? Were they reading? Did they care? Go again. If you've had good content, recycle it. Find another way to tell the story on it. If you've had any media coverage, use that, continue to use it, because they've still got the baseline authority, so people see, oh, they were in the Herald, oh, it must be really important. You know, you could just share the headline and they won't even read it. They're just like, oh, I saw you on the Herald. And it just works for people. So those 2 things for me.
My one is just to be really strategic. This is a space that takes time, energy and money. Quite often we'll go into a business and they won't be able to tell us any of those 3 things that they have to offer social within the business. So what I would really encourage you to do is actually kind of sit down and think realistically over the next 12 months and think about it as a 12-month thing. What time do we have to dedicate to this? What energy? So that's if you've got a CEO, for example, that doesn't know about social media at all, it's going to take a lot more energy, so you just need to be aware of that. And then the money thing. So the money thing is around how are you going to resource for content, for management potentially, for advice, for a whole bunch of other things around it. So get really clear on your strategy for 12 months. And then that kind of feeds into my second point, which is be always on. So I went to a talk probably about 2 or 3 years ago when we could travel in Cannes at the Creativity Festival, and it was really, really powerful. It was about how you become creative and effective at the same time, and what it's been proven is that if you're campaign-based and you sort of push things out in campaigns, you'll be less effective than if you don't break your marketing budget up into those sort of tiny increments. Think about it as being an always-on campaign, so that when you've got a message to push, it goes over and above that inventory that you've already committed to, and that way you're kind of reaping the benefits of things like algorithms, because if you're posting sporadically, you're less likely to grow your audience over time than if you're posting strategically and building upon that audience. So yeah, be strategic and go always on.
Don't be scared. Anything that you try, you can learn from. Download canva.com. It's basically it's basically free Photoshop, and it's way more user-friendly, and it has incredible amount of so you can just Google you can search Instagram template, and it will give you like a whole lot of things to just plop your images into, and yeah, just start is the key thing. Don't be scared of it. Start giving it a go and learn from it.
Fantastic. That's awesome. I hope that's been really helpful. I think we're going to open the floor to questions now. Awesome. I can see one down the back there.
Hey, just before we go to that, you finished on the influencer thing, and it really, over the last little while, I've myself looked at that and gone, this just looks like a load of rubbish to me. So people are selling stuff, so it's obviously not a load of rubbish, but it's actually just been highlighted to me, I guess, the influence of people recently. So I'm a football fan, and I don't know if anyone saw the latest article. Cristiano Ronaldo was doing an interview at the Euros. Coke are a sponsor. Coke placement is on the interview table. He walked into the interview table, took the 2 bottles of Coke off and put a bottle of water there, and Coke stocks have absolutely crashed. because of that.
So one word, he just said agua.
He just
and put it down.
So water, drink water. So that that was when it kind of ticked to me. Go, actually, the influence that people has is far bigger than I ever thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those people, and just to flow on before we get to there, when you're thinking about that level of influence, we talk about this a lot in our business, say Harry Styles is coming to New Zealand, we could use influencers for that campaign, but who's the biggest influencer of Harry Styles? Probably the head girl at Dio. Like she's the person that's going to, she should be the one that's getting the 2 free tickets because that's where it's going to go, the person that makes the coffee at the best coffee shop in town, the person that cuts hair, we work about lots, people that work in concierge in hotels, I know for the opening of Lion King, we've got quite a few people like that coming along. People that run the Maitre of Soul is coming because I can see her going to every table in the next week after the opening of Lion King, telling everyone that they have to go. So it's really important. Your question down the back.
Paul McCarthy, PBM Safety. Just a couple of observations. Obviously, Venue World, relative to you guys, is probably a more conservative sort of way to look at things. If you look at even just now in the music industry, if you're a small young band and you want to get out there and do stuff, you're using all the social sort of stuff, but inevitably to get your record played on a radio station, you're still going to pay a publicist to help you with that sort of stuff. I'm interested to hear your comments on that, and also obviously some alternative ways for venues to look at how they're getting acts outside of the traditional. We're getting promoters to sell us those products and manage them, and help get tours happening, etc. And also, what's your opinion of Twitch?
Cool. Okay, I think that was 3 questions in one, but good work. So the first question being about. I've kind of lost the train of thought. First of all, Twitch. I really don't know anything about it. Does anyone want to?
I can talk a little bit about Twitch.
Amazing.
So Twitch. Forgive me if I'm wrong here. I obviously sit across a whole bunch of channels, but gaming, streaming mostly, right? And sort of streaming and watching things. Yeah, we saw that take off quite a lot last year over COVID, particularly with live DJ sets. It has tailed off a little bit. What I would say about platforms like that is it's often complementary to other stuff. So the reason why we saw such a big uptake last year was that people started live streaming gigs and DJ sets from their houses. They were doing this mostly on Facebook Live to start with, and then obviously Facebook started cracking down on that type of content because the algorithm was picking up music that wasn't licensed for that type of video content and getting themselves into copyright issues. So people were then kind of, again, shifting behaviour, leaving the Facebook Live room and going into the Twitch room. I went and spoke with the Twitch guys a couple of years ago. It's really used more overseas. It's a platform I'm really interested in here in New Zealand. Our behaviour in New Zealand tends to be a little bit different from other countries. There are some really interesting things happening with esports and Twitch. And we've also sort of seen the rise of Twitch influencers as well. So it's a channel to keep an eye on, but for a local audience, it's probably not a main focus as yet. But it's a very reliable streaming platform. It's just how do you invest on getting your audience over there. So for example, if you're doing something live on Twitch, I would still be suggesting that you probably spend a decent chunk of money on Facebook to promote your Twitch stream link. Yeah,
that sounds good.
Yeah, keep an eye on it.
I suppose the other question was around using acts, getting acts through social media.
Actually, the idea of younger bands being able to use the opportunities of, younger bands being able to use the media, social media, but also them still having to pay a publicist to get them airplayed, and then what was the other ways that smaller venues, etc., can start looking at not having to use like mainstream promoters for people to potentially even self-manage that sort of stuff and get into venues where they can't because they're not with the big promoter.
Yeah, definitely. Alice, do you feel like you've got some things to say there, especially around, I'm guessing some of the acts that come through your venue don't have massive marketing budgets and are using social lots for that?
I think the key thing there is taking some onus as a venue to create a brand that is used by those incoming artists. So our size, our biggest space at Rangatira is, as I said, flexible, but between 300 to 400 seats, depending on what the setup is. So the kinds of acts that are coming through are smaller and often independent. And so, and I'm not saying we're there or we're perfect, but our strategy from now, and that has come of it sort of being expected of us because of that, is for us to invest in becoming that the institutional brand that people can come to and use that audience. So as I said, we have our own internal ticketing, which means that we hold on to all of that data that we can sort of target, and that it's sort of self-fulfilling in that if there were a lot of independent artists or a lot of artists with an independent promoter or whatever, that they would then continue to bring their acts back because we in theory have a database of their other acts. So it's sort of about it. That's not free, but it's about sort of shifting your focus to be like for us, for example, we're performing arts mostly, but thinking more like an art centre or a space where at its base level we work and invest to for our brand to be able to hold those smaller venues and artists, and also not necessarily expecting that everyone's going to want the same thing. So understanding and working with those people and creating your brand in a place where, so a show sometimes comes in and they have 3 people on it that have worked in film, that have been cinematographers, and they come to you with this incredible trailer and they don't need any help. But maybe they have never done anything on social media, so we'll help them with that. Or they'll come to you and they'll have an incredible performance and it's slick and the cast is amazing, but they don't know how to capture that in a poster form that makes people understand what it is. So then you help them like that. So not going into it and going, this is the package, we give you 2 posts on Facebook and we support you that way. Like working with them to see what they need. But the big thing is investing in yourself as the brand that will uplift them, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Looking at other questions from the floor.
Hey, I've got one quickly. So what about growing your profile? So for us, we don't have a big profile of people following our channels. How can we grow that?
Do you have an email list?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
But honestly, like most of you guys will probably have an email list, and everyone thinks like, I don't email anymore, I hate email. I'm cracking 30% open rates. It's pretty good. So yeah, I've gone back to a weekly newsletter, and it might just be rehashed social content a little bit, and then reminding those people like, hey, you can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn or like whatever it is that you're doing. But I think capturing that email address is, I learned it very early in the accounting side of things. I was like, nah, those days are gone. And now I'm like, shit, they were right. Because that's where I'm having the most success. And, again, going back to us as Kiwis, we're like, oh, don't email people too many times. And you've got to do it at this time because otherwise people will unsubscribe. I'm like, oh, yep, go and ask Grab a Seat. Go and ask them if they've stopped emailing everyone at 5 a.m. every morning or whatever. So it's like, if you want it, you'll open it or you just won't open it. So stop trying to think that just because your mates say this is what then everybody will do. And one of the other things is like if you're emailing, maybe 30% open it, but some people just haven't even had the time or the chance. So potentially resending it with a different title can get you more opens, but also you do run the risk of those people that are like, I've seen this twice now, like I will unsubscribe. But if you, like we're so scared of losing followers or subscribers or friends or whatever as we grow up, but usually we learn, well, actually we weed out the ones that don't want to be involved with us and we have a better community of people anyway.
Totally, a quality over quantity conversation. Yeah.
I think I would add to that by saying that sometimes those figures are vanity metrics to a certain degree. Again, one of those things I never thought I'd be saying 7 or 8 years ago. But I once built a community of around 1 million people around a particular sport vertical, and that was amazing. Obviously, we were sitting there celebrating our success. 1 million people, could you believe it? Like, amazing. And then the algorithm changed and we reached on average 0.5% of that very engaged audience. So on places like Facebook now, the idea of you having followers is quite important still from a credibility perspective. You know, if someone goes to find your brand and you've only got 3 followers, how good are you really? So definitely invest in those kind of early few thousand and make sure you're doing things to incentivize people to be part of your page. But actually now in terms of targeting and boosting, you're much more effective. It costs us more generally to reach people who follow a brand's page than for us to reach people who suit the message and who the message is more relevant to. So when you're kind of thinking about size of audience and how you're trying to increase your overall followers, make it very platform specific. Don't feed those big numbers up to, especially to senior management, because they get really excited by the fact that if they've got more followers than so-and-so, whereas actually what they should be looking at is the effectiveness of how that channel is performing rather than necessarily the number. And actually a bit of an insight on this is that now, in terms of probably looking around the room, it probably won't be as relevant for as many people here because we've probably been on social media for a while and this behaviour is quite different 6 or 7 years ago. But for a slightly younger audience, or for people that are new to social media, the average amount of brand accounts that they follow on Facebook in their entire lifetime so far is 1. So they are engaging with your content. They probably think they follow you, but if I go back and look at the brands that I follow on social media, what I've kind of realised is the ones I interact with the most are the ones that turn up, and they turn up with really entertaining or useful information in my newsfeed, or I just like it. But the ones that I do follow are actually ones that I followed like 6 or 7 years ago when it was super cool to follow everything on Facebook, which is now not the behaviour that we see there.
Alice, do you have anything that you can talk to around how you explore your channels or sort of showcase your channels inside your physical venue? So encouraging people to tag. Is that something that you guys are doing?
Not as well as we should. We just have physical reminders, posters, that sort of thing with the handles on it. We used to, when Snapchat was really kicking off, that was everywhere. We had it like on every tap beer, like please just like get the QR code and get on Snapchat. But it's sort of, I think it probably just having some presence, having it somewhere. I feel like I've seen in bathrooms at Spark Arena or whatever, like make sure you tag and all that sort of thing. I think that's enough, and as long as you have the brand recognition so that someone actually knows that they are at Q Theatre as opposed to just at a musical, and your name on social is that brand, people just look you up. People just go, I'm at EVANZ, I'm going to look for EVANZ.
I think a really fun way that I've seen some other venues play with this as well is through proximity filters. So I think Uber did quite a good campaign here a couple of years ago where if you were in an Uber you could download like exclusive filters, and so if you think about again that customer behaviour of I'm at an event and I'm taking a photo with my friend and I'm swiping through looking for filters, there are ways now of actually designing your own filters or to promote that or to kind of promote that pre-event as well. So there's lots of kind of little things that you can do, and I think you've done a couple of them with some of your musicals, haven't you? And they've been very, very successful.
Definitely. We've done, especially with films as well, I think they're a great fun thing to do.
There's also a lot of real estate that you'll have on like on tickets or e-tickets or stuff like that, that if someone's sort of walking in and getting it out, then it's just in front of them as well.
Totally. Hey, thank you so much, guys, for your words today, and they were really interesting. And thank you guys very much for having us. A round of applause for our panelists.